Transition Tuesday. I'm Jane. This is Joe. Today we're talking about just right. So the core of a transition plan may not be obvious, but it is what a person needs to have a good life after they finish school, what a person with a disability needs. So what's the difference between basic human needs versus basic human rights? Basic human needs are physical things like food, water, shelter. Basic human rights are access to medical care, the right to vote, the right to be treated with respect, to work in your community. Those are constructs of societal rules, laws, legislation that help make a person with a disability be able to expect the same quality of life that anybody else has. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Humans have tried to create rules to ensure human rights for ages. You know, we've been working on this for a long time. Usually after something significant like a war or a terrible disaster happens, we as a society, as a community of humans, look around and say, there are some things that need to change, so we're going to create some laws and some rules so that people can have a good quality of life. So here's a quick little review of some of those major milestones in that process of developing human rights. The Magna Carta in 1215. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man in 1789. The U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights of 1788, ratified in 1788. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The thing about those documents, though, is that a certain group of the population was left out. In 1975, the United Nations created the Declaration on the Rights of Disabled Persons. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And so there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon that the rights of people with disabilities would be guaranteed by law. There's other kinds of bills of rights that you've heard of. There is the Patient Bill of Rights, and there is the IDEA, which is our education laws, which provide for people with disabilities to have equal access to education. Within that law are the parents' rights. So we keep constructing rules and legislation to ensure that these basic rights as a citizen in a community are followed, so that there is a resource and a recourse if you are not being treated in accordance with your rights. You can go to court. You can file a complaint. So there's this interesting little document that we read through at the beginning of every meeting that Joe has relating to his comp waiver, which is a group of services and supports that he gets as a person with a disability, which provide for his direct support, caregiver, and a range of other services that are not related to school. They're related to his quality of life as an individual with a significant developmental disability. In Georgia, it's called a NOW or a comp or a source or an ICWP waiver, different names. But with that, there are a group of rights that are identified in this document. There's 22 of them. And I think they're significant enough to talk about. So when you're looking at a transition plan for a person, especially someone who's nonverbal, who has a lot of need for support to live their best life, I think it's important to understand what are those root rights, those core rights that each person has. And I think as we go through these, imagine yourself living in an institutional setting and not being able to speak up for yourself. I think you will understand the importance of these on a different level if you look at it from that perspective. So the first one, right to wear your own clothes and choose what to wear. The right to keep personal belongings in a private place that you can access. The right to meet people and participate in community activities. The right to socialize, have visitors, see friends and family members. The right to choose how and when and with whom you spend your free time. The right to exercise and have fun. The right to send and receive mail that is not opened without your permission and in your presence. The right to services that help you live, work, and play in normal ways. So imagine that you are in a hospital bed. You are nonverbal. There is a schedule, there's a medication schedule, there's a staff schedule. There is other people in the room with you who also have high levels of needs. See where I'm going? This is not an easy to-do list to check off, but it is very important for those of us who care about or live with a person with a disability to understand that these are rights. These are a person's rights, and we have a responsibility to assist this person with accomplishing these needs in the best way that we can. The right to worship in the religion you choose. The right to training and education. The right to vote. The right to be treated well and with respect. Here are some things that you cannot do. You cannot be given medication without a written order by a doctor or as punishment for bad behavior or for the convenience of staff. So you might be a very disagreeable person, but you have the right not to be drugged into sedation just because you have a difficult behavior or personality, or you don't like a staff member. You cannot be subjected to experimental research without your consent. Well, you know this has happened historically. You have the right to see a doctor as soon as you need one and the right to receive adequate medical care. You have a toothache. You have the right to go to a dentist. Your medical record is confidential. You cannot be tied or held down or forced to be alone unless it is to protect you or someone else. Your things cannot be searched unless you are present or if good reasons are given. A legal search and seizure warrant, for example, or you give your consent to search for something. You have the right to say no to anybody trying to change the way you act by hurting you, scaring you, or upsetting you. You have the right to use the phone privately to make and get calls. Now, with a nonverbal person, this is a little bit tricky. So that's where communication and transition planning are integral into the process so that you create a process for giving this person an opportunity to have communication by phone. You have the right to make choices about where you live, whom you live with, and the way you spend your time or who you spend your time with. We talk about this a lot. This is like a really big part of transition planning. The right, the human right, is the ability to make that choice. And you have the right to work in your community. So those are 22 rights that we talk about every year when we are planning Joe's care through his comp waiver. I think if you look at those rights when you are considering transition planning for a young person for after high school, or a person who is moving out of a facility into their own place and they're talking to support staff. If you are an aging parent and you are considering a host home or a other kind of living situation for a loved one, knowing those rights are a key part of how to measure the livability and the compatibility of that plan or that place with your person. Really important things to consider. Big things to consider. Ask questions. How do you handle when we want to come visit? What about FaceTime calls or Zoom calls with my loved one? Do we have to schedule it ahead of time? What if he doesn't want to do it? How does the staff respond to that? How did they treat Joe with the respect and the human rights that he deserves? These are big questions. They are integral to transition planning. And actually, integral to any kind of life planning that you do, whether you have a disability or not. So anyway, big topic today. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Transition Tuesdays with Jane and Joe. Joe's deep in thought about all the things we're talking about. Might be asking him some questions about what he thinks later on. But anyway, thanks for joining us. See you next time.